Hey YouTube, today we're working on a 2005 Toyota Corolla and we're going to be changing the front brake pads and rotors. So the first thing we want to do is basically get the front wheels off the car. We're going to put the emergency brake on, jack it up and support it so it's safe. So now we've got the tires off. I'm working on the passenger side here. The driver's side is exactly the same. So I've rotated the steering wheel to the right so that it gives me a little more clearance in here for working. First thing we're going to want to do is take the front caliper off with a 14 mil wrench and undo these two bolts, one located here and one located here. And just undo those bolts. And the caliper will pull off. Sometimes if it's stuck on there, you might need to put a screwdriver and work it back and forth this way or even against here to pry it off. This one's nice and loose, so we can just go ahead and pull it off. Now you don't really want the caliper to be hanging on the brake hose itself, so I'm just going to set it up here out of the way for now. And the second thing we're going to want to do, because we have to change the rotors, get the caliper support off. To do that, we need a 17 mil socket. And I've got a 1/2 inch drive here with a flex bar, and there's two bolts for that as well. One there and one there. Just break them free. We'll just pull the caliper support bracket off. There it is. Got a couple of worn out brake pads. The inboard's worse than the outboard, but they definitely need replacing. I'm going to set that aside. Now the brake rotor will just pull off, but this one's been on here a while, so it's seized into place. If we're going to try and save these and have them machined, we would try and get them off without damaging them, but we got a new set of brake rotors today, so we're just going to bang them off with a hammer and just give them a hit. Break them free. We got our new rotors here. Now, new brake rotors come ready to go. The only thing is a lot of times they're packaged in a little grease. Keep them from rusting. So you want to make sure they're nice and clean before you put them on the car. You got a little brake clean and a rag. You can see the grease coming off it right there. Nice and clean. These brake rotors have a nice finish on them. It's called a crosshatch finish. You can see how it's a non-directional finish and it's crosshatch. That's to help you when the brakes break in initially. It'll help to seat and mate the two surfaces together. So the second thing we're going to do is we're going to put the rotor on, but we want to make sure that this surface doesn't have any rust buildup to prevent it from going on square. This one's nice and clean already. We put that on. I'm just going to use a lug nut here to hold it in place while we're working. We'll go back to the caliper support. We'll move the old brake pads. My new brake pads came with brake pad slippers, so I'm going to take these off and then I'm going to clean them. Basically a wire brush is what we're going to need. Sometimes you get some heavy rust buildup. You might have to get a small file in there and make sure there's no rust buildup. These are pretty decent shape. They're not grooved or pitted. Nice and straight still, so totally usable. We're good to go. We're going to get our new brake pad slippers and install them. They go in this way. They got an inboard tab here and here. That's going to sit on this part here and here. Let's slide that in. Just push it down. Same on this side. Push it down until it stops. I know that that's seated all the way. Nice. Same on both sides. Good. So now I'm going to get some caliper slide grease. I'm going to put a little bit of caliper slide grease on here. Now you don't want to go crazy with the grease, and you don't want to use anything but caliper slide grease. We want to make sure also none of the grease goes on the inboard side, here or here, because that'll get on your rotor.
Can you take another look at that?
So we'll go here, wipe it on, make sure we got lots of coverage. But we don't want any on here. There and there. Looks pretty good. Second thing we're going to do on the caliper support is the caliper slide pins. These have to be free. Like this and like this. We'll pull them out, wipe them off, put a little bit of grease on each one, spread it evenly, back in. You want to make sure there's no rust. These are nice and free, clean, dry, no water in there. Nice and even amount of grease. Place it back in, turn it. You want to make sure that the boot is seated on the pin. Sometimes you can, you put them back in and it'll be stuck like that. You don't want that, it'll let water in. So it's in there, they're seated. And we're going to install this. The 2 caliper support bolts. I recommend putting a dot of blue Loctite, which is removable Loctite, on each one. A little bit like that. A little bit like that, just an insurance policy. Set this in place. Get our 17 mil, and we're going to torque those caliper support bolts to 79 foot-pounds with your torque wrench. If you don't have a torque wrench, basically make sure you get these tight. You can use your 1/2-inch flex bar and give them a good pull on them. Next step is I got 2 new brake pads here. Brake pads are going to go in. These have the same brake pads left and right. The brake pads on this one, I had a little trouble on the other side. They're a bit tight, and it's because of how they are manufactured, so there's a little bit of a burr on these. So you can file these down or grind them down, just clean them off, make sure they're square. The idea is if this is seated properly and with some grease on it, these should go in there nice and easy. You don't want them flopping around, but you want them to be free. So I'm just going to grind these. Carefully not taking off too much material. Just gonna get the burrs off them. That's all I need, is just a little bit like that. Same on both. Now I don't like grinding these down unless I have to, but if these don't float freely in here, your brakes will burn up on you. So I've had to, because I did the other side and this side, there's too tight of a fit. Make sure we get them greased so they don't rust up. Little dab of caliper slide grease on each one. Keeping it off, we don't want any grease on the friction material. The brake pads, kind of put them in a little tiny bit of an angle and they'll just fit in nice and free. See how easy they go in now? Push them into place. They come back and forth. They're nice and greased. Same on the inboard side. All right. Make sure those are in. They're nice and free. Squeeze together. I've turned these in this orientation. Now we're going to put the caliper back on, but first thing we have to do is back the piston off. This is a caliper piston. This is a single piston caliper. We got to push this back to allow for now the new brake pad here. So one thing we want to do before we push it back is make sure we don't have any buildup of stuff on the rubber boot here. Wipe that off the best we can. There's a bunch of tools out there, different procedures for doing this. I use a C-clamp. You can buy a special tool for it. You can use a big pair of pliers. You can push against the old brake pad. You can put the old brake pad in there. If it's worn out enough. Just going to return the piston. And when I'm doing this, I'm making sure the hose isn't kinked, and it should go back fairly easy. Sometimes you give your C-clamp a couple of turns, wait a second, allows the fluid to travel back towards the master cylinder under the hood. Give it a turn, wait a sec. Couple more here. And keep in mind while you're doing this, there is a chance that some brake fluid may come out of the master cylinder, which this one's doing right now. Take a look there. That's okay. That just means that we're taking the fluid from the caliper and returning it to the master cylinder. So we're just going to let that drip up there. It's not hurting anything at all. No air's got in the system. We're ready to put this back in. One thing we're checking for is to make sure the rubber boot isn't over top of the piston. Sometimes the boot can be hanging out and you got to make sure it's seated without puncturing a hole in it around the boot. And you want the boot back so that the piston itself contacts the pad and there's no rubber in between the piston and the caliper pad, brake pad. Put that back on like this, and we got these. We're going to turn them so this flat spot lines up here. Same thing again, a little dot of blue Loctite on each one, doesn't hurt. And these are torqued to 25 foot-pounds. Now you might want to just double check that your torque is the same on whatever model you have. So one thing we want to do is we want to make sure when we tighten this up, the bolt comes in tight, the slide pin is mated against the caliper, it's not caught on this ear here. We want it seated in and orientated correct. You could tighten this bolt up theoretically and with this turn and it would be stuck on here, which would cause you problems. Same with the bottom one.
Oops, sorry.
Yep. There we go. I'll check the torque on that with my torque wrench in just a sec. That's it. Calipers are backed off, pads are replaced, rotors are replaced. One thing we got to keep in mind now, we're going to want to pump the brake pedal. That's going to push the caliper pistons back out into place, put the pads in the right position. After we've done that, we can go ahead, make sure our master cylinder fluid's full. You can clean brake fluid off in this car with water if you wanted to, or some brake clean. Pump the brake pedal before you get going, torque your wheels down, and that's it. Your calipers are serviced, your brake pads are replaced, and your rotors are replaced. Thanks for watching.